Now it is, right? I did this presentation while not sleeping in Barcelona airport, trying to arrive here. It took me 2 days. So I hope that you applaud me in the end. But the warning about the presentation is that I did it while waiting for my airplane in the middle of the night in Barcelona. And I haven't looked at it since, so if it has some mistakes, you will have to excuse me. I am speaking about the Azores, which are, contrary to what some lunatics say, were not discovered by the Vikings, were not populated by the Romans. Archaeologically speaking, we only have evidence of them having population after the 15th century AD. And they are part of Portugal, and they are more or less on a third way going to the Americas. They are composed by a set of 3 groups, the Western, the Central, and the Eastern, and they have 9 islands. They are all volcanic. They were very important in the age of the discoveries, because they were exactly situated in the pattern of winds that forced all the Portuguese and Spanish ships coming from Africa, India, or the Americas to be on their last leg to Europe. And they were there to support all of these fleets. The fleets were coming from Africa with, they were coming from Africa with ivory, slaves, and gold. They were coming from Asia with pepper, spices, and Chinese pottery. And they were coming from the Americas with gold and silver and tropical products. And I was living there, and I am the living proof of how divers can get involved in archaeology. So I started out as an amateur diver, and then I eventually evolved to become an archaeologist. It was probably not an evolution, it was just a step. And what I first started to do was to study archives. So this is a letter of a fleet from Spain that was going to get from Cuba to Seville, loaded with gold and silver, but they first encountered pirates, which were not pirates, were corsairs from England at the Azores. And then they faced a storm in the Atlantic that further reduced their ships. Anyhow, we started looking at the archives, looking for wrecks. And wrecks like this. Unlike Greece, we don't have wrecks from the antiquity, we only have wrecks after the 1500s. Here you have some of those English pirates and corsairs that were waiting at the Azores for these Spanish fleets. And this is an example of Fayal Island, where I spent 4 years in the archives to reach to this proper location. And in 1999, so this was the last century, or the previous century, so this is history being made, we went and dived at the precise spot of where we had discovered the archives, and we found the remains of the 1615 Portuguese East Indiaman that was carrying a treasure from Burmany that had been looted there by a Portuguese mercenary, the grandson of a French ambassador called Nico. And I was watching everyone smoking outside, and you were, inspiring nicotine. And nicotine came from the name of this French ambassador to the Lisbon court that eventually had a grandson that looted Burmany, and this story ends up in the Azores. So we found cowries from Africa, we found Chinese porcelain, and this eventually marked the spot of the shipwreck. Another shipwreck that we found through the archives was in the small island of São Jorge, in this very, very shallow, very, very little harbor, which in the 18th century was the final resting place for these English frigate. So it's like you've been in the middle of nowhere and the space shuttle comes in and lands. That's what the people from this island experienced in 1783. I worked with Kevin Grisman from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology in the previous century, and we did some drawings of the wreck site, including the iron cannons, and we discovered that there was an artist aboard this frigate. So we do not have photos, but we have the drawings of the actual ship that was wrecked in the Azores. I always say that archaeologists do not dig up artifacts, like Mortimer Willis said. We dig people, we dig stories, and it is through these stories that we can connect to other people and explain to them that instead of using ChatGPT or a presentation, that you can touch at the artifacts and connect with these people that were exactly like you, that loved like you, that suffered like you, but they lived 2 or 3 centuries ago. And this is actually the hook, where you can look at a fisherman or a diver and get them into the importance of underwater cultural heritage. This site was later on impacted by the construction of the harbour, and we went there and we salvaged what we could, which was almost nothing. So some iron cannons that came to the surface after 200 years in the water were drawn and recorded and then put in the water, and they are now away from that harbour. The history of the Azores was still marked by being in the middle of the Atlantic. This is a 4-masted schooner called the Caroline that was wrecked in 1915 because the people had scurvy. So even in the 20th century there were sailors with scurvy, and they became so incapacitated that the ship was wrecked because they could not navigate properly. It is a dish recovered by a diver and offered to us as a token of this shipwreck. This is the Slavonia. It took immigrants from the Balkans and Greece to the United States, and it was the first ship to have ever issued an SOS. It was not the Titanic. The first SOS to be sent in distress was by this ship. The first class passengers wanted to see the Azores from close, and they managed to have their wish granted. The captain was trying to go through to these 2 islands, but it got lost in the fog, and they ended up seeing very, very near the Azorean island of Flores. This was in 1909. Slavonia was a total loss, and we have also made a complete archive of everything. This is the actual wreck site, and it's now a diveable place. I will talk to you later on. In the Great War between 1917 and 1918, the Azores were a base for the American Navy, and this was because the strategic importance of this island was the same in the 16th century as it is today. Today we have an American air base in the Azores, and all the aircraft that are crossing the Atlantic towards Iraq or whatever are being refueled. It's a stepping stone between 2 worlds. So anyhow, they were there because there was this great menace. This is a Portuguese crew from the Great War, and this is an American crew also from the Great War, and the 2 met in the Azorean waters, and they fought each other. The Germans had U-35 that was based in Qatar, later was based in Qatar in Montenegro, and they had a German officer filming the event. So there is actual footage of the combat between the German submarine and the Portuguese Navy ship, and it sunk, killing the captain. It's one of the greatest, heroic feats of the Portuguese Navy of the late. So this is also the island of the Azores. I told you that I made a mistake. I don't know why the slide was there, so that's why I was sleeping. So this is again the trawler that was fighting that submarine, which was a used submarine. The damage caused by that submarine shells and then it eventually sunk. In between the wars, the Americans made the Azores a stopping place for these seaplanes, and when World War II came, there was this huge gap in the Atlantic. Up until 1942, the majority of Allied shipping was sunk in that area, which had no coverage either by aircraft or by ships. So what happened was that here you have, a Greek ship salvages the crew and takes them to Lisbon. So Portugal was neutral in World War II, but these ships came seeking shelter in the Azores. This is the Hellenic Castle that was struck on the stern by a German torpedo in 1942, and while it was lying in the Azores in the Horta harbor, it was being preyed upon by U-581, a German submarine that wanted to sink it for good. But help came through HMS Westcott, and they managed to sink the German ship. Here you see all of the crew members, except 4 that were dead with the attack. You see the submarine sinking there, and here you see the Germans reaching their sinker and getting imprisoned. Not the captain, but the person below the captain, which I don't remember the name now in English, he managed to swim 6 kilometers and reach Portugal's ground, so he reached Pico Island, and he was eventually returned to Germany, and we held a ceremony some years ago with the last survivor of this sinking. What is interesting is that a German foundation stationed in the Azores managed to find the shipwreck in 900 meters of water. So they have a submarine that could descend up to 1,000 meters, and at 900 meters they found the wreck of U-581, which is lying around 2 kilometers away from that island. The Americans and the British managed to actually construct that airbase and to get aircraft there. And when that airbase was completed, there was no more threats from the German submarines. So the war was basically lost for Germany. At Terceira Island, we still have a site that is connected to World War II, which is this wreck that was actually 2 wrecks. As you can see, there is a smaller ship on top of the bigger ship, and these ships were wrecked in the storm, and when you dive there, it's still you can still find stuff from that period. Terceira Island is very, very small, and the bay that I showed in one of my first slides is even smaller. I did research, and we have around 120 shipwrecks in this bay, starting in 1522 and ending in 1996. Between those 2 arrows was a iron wreck that they called the Ship of Salt, of which I will talk later on. I will speed up my presentation. What we have to remember is that this was a place where countless ships carrying gold and silver were sunk. In 1996, the Americans from the airbase started diving in Terceira Island, and in 1972, Sidney Wignall, a British ex-spy from MI6, came to the island and did the first recovery of submerged artifacts. It discovered this huge cannon, which is now in the museum, but everything that was smaller than this cannon was subtracted and taken away. We can only imagine what kind of artifacts were taken out of the island. And the police eventually drove them away in 1972. Portugal was still under a dictatorship. This is a pure gold artifact. We don't know what it is, that it was found by a diver, an amateur diver, and delivered to the Portuguese museum there. And it is gold that was really the menace against our underwater cultural heritage. And in 1993, treasure hunters like Robert Marx bribed Portuguese politicians, and they concocted a treasure hunting law, which basically allowed these treasure hunters to go to the Portuguese waters and uncover everything that they wanted to uncover and sell all the artifacts in auctions. We fought that in the Azores, and we managed to overturn the law. And so we start doing archaeology with the people that knew how to do archaeology. People from Parks Canada and people from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology from Texas A&M University. So we uncovered Angry C and Angry B, which we had to remove piece by piece because they were going to be impacted by a marina that was going to be built on top of them. We did the shipwreck sites. We uncovered pipes from what is probably a mid-17th century shipwreck, together with hundreds and hundreds of leather soles from boots and other footwear. And then we discovered another wreck exactly lying on the path, which we believe is a Spanish galleon that we also had to remove piece by piece, and which had stratigraphy. So below you see the timbers of a late 16th century shipwreck, and on top you see a boiler from an 1864 steamer. We uncovered everything. We removed almost no artifacts. We did the shipwreck site diagram, and we managed to, in the end, recover about 1 liter of mercury. The ship was filled with mercury. We were scooping mercury out with syringes, and the fish were swallowing all of this mercury, which was not healthy. The ship that I told you about, the divers called it the salt ship, and through archival research and archaeological methods, we did side scan sonar with it. We uncovered a drawing of it and discovered that it was a Brazilian steamer that had sunk there during a storm in 1878. This is the last announcement that they were looking for immigrants to go to Brazil. Terceira looked like this at the time. We went to the English archives, managed to recover all the information regarding the steamer. We did the leaflet, and then we inaugurated the first underwater museum of the Azores. The shipwreck was already there. The only thing that we did was we put some plates that are taken regularly to be cleaned out, and divers or snorkelers can go there and see a shipwreck and have all of the information. This is a diving magazine related to the history. Since they had the wrecks, what did they wanted to do? They wanted to do, as I said, underwater preserves. And this is a guide that the Azores made, where all of the visitable sites are gathered by group, and you can go and visit them with the local diving companies. So fish can go and come, but shipwrecks are always there. So from the 1957 shipwreck to a World War II shipwreck, we turned this into blue economy hooks. So they are there, we put the story on top of them, we tell all of the drama on it, and we create the urge of the people to go and visit them. We believe that in 10 years, 35 million euros will be made out of this, because everyone is now wanting to dive into these places. And what is happening is that in 2022, the Azores proposed and won what we call the European Label Heritage. It's the only one that has ever been awarded to underwater cultural heritage, and it is now recognized of all these 1,000 documented shipwrecks. The 30 wrecks that compose this route are the basis of the candidacy that the Azores made to the European community, and it was recognized. Besides that, and I'm almost finishing, They took all of these artifacts and they produced a travel exhibition that was displayed in the local and regional museums. That's Tenebrio and Mara. And then we wrote a collection of 12 books on underwater heritage. They invited me to present it, that's why I have a cravat. I usually dress like this. And last year, we went to Terceira Island and we did a free course to 30 people, from archaeologists to technicians to divers to people that had no connection whatever with history. And we took them diving, we trained them on how to use a water dredge and a metal detector, and during a week we explained everything they had to do with conservation and archaeology. And I do believe that this is the way. When I was diving in the 90s, there was this little kid that was watching us from the shore, and he eventually grew so interested that he became an archaeologist, and he was the coordinator of the archaeological program in the Azores. I do believe that it's only by getting the drama of shipwrecks and telling the people the story that you can have the public on your side. If the public is not on our side, then it's a loss for everyone. Thank you.